Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on the world of big data. Today, my guest is from SAP. We have Carolee Gearhart. Carolee is the National VP of OEM and Strategic Partner Group for North America at the company. So, Carolee, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Rich. It's great to be with you today.
Well, it's my pleasure. You know, we haven't had SAP on the show before, but I'd love to have you take us through your slides, and maybe we'll just follow that with Q&A.
So I think for me, where I'd like to start is really, I really feel that great thinking has power and kind of resonance over time. And one of the things that Thomas Jefferson said that I think really applies to today's subject of big data is that possession of facts is knowledge, the use of them is wisdom, the choice of them is education. Knowledge is not power but riches, and like them, has its value in spending. I really feel like this captures some of the value we can derive from big data today. It's about having sure the facts and the data insights and using that to drive actions and really spending our time and resources where it will count the most. So that's a really good place to be, and I think the question is sort of how do we get there? Clearly, having confidence in the information we get is critical, but needing it to be accurate is also a given. It's only when that information sort of supports business drivers that we're able to think through the implications of that information and action it in a way that's going to have meaningful impact on our business. So with the volume of worldwide corporate data growth at about 60% per year, I think the questions are, how do companies use it? When do they use it? And how can it help them beat their competitors? We all know on a personal level how much data we're struggling to consume on a daily basis. I know for me, between my inbox, news, other social media, school information for my son, friends, there's really no way to keep up with it. There's a book called Information Anxiety by Richard Saul Wurman, who many of you may know as the founder of the TED Conference, a really cool venue. I find very inspiring. But he published a book about 20 years ago. And in that book, he stated that more information has been produced in the last 30 years than the previous 5,000. And you know what? It's 20 years later now than when he wrote that. So the amount of digital information produced increases 10 times every 5 years, which explains why we all feel like we're drowning in information. Companies are experiencing the same sort of data overload at a really exponential rate. And so with this data kind of deluge, I'll describe it, how do companies use the information they're gathering to make better decisions and to really get a competitive advantage out of it? So big data and the ability to transform it into actionable insights can really make or break a company's bottom line. And, at the outset, it's not an easy problem to solve. There are a few companies who are really making it their business to solve this data company, and certainly SAP knows its way around big data. As you can see, Gartner calls us a leader in visionary and data quality tools, and we help thousands of companies really transform kind of raw information into actionable insights. But for me, before we go any further, I really want to take a step back and talk about what we mean when we say big data. So how much data is there? The term zettabyte is being thrown around these days, really in relation to the amount of data being produced. But what is a zettabyte? So I asked this, and the answer is it's roughly equivalent to about 250 billion DVDs. Or this slide has another example of a way to think about it. 1.8 zettabytes are the equivalent of 5.7 billion 32-gig iPads, which would cost you about $34.4 trillion, which is equivalent to the combined GDP of the U.S., Japan, China, Germany, France, UK, and Italy. So the issues around data are not just about the amount of information we're receiving, but they're also about the value of that information. There's an enormous global economy right now that exists just around capturing information, capturing data, and our challenge is really how to create global value out of all of that information. So when we've been focusing a lot on the volume part of the story, and I know for me that's because part of what I face on a day-to-day basis, but really companies face a sort of what I'll characterize as a triple threat when it comes to big data. They really form the core issues around big data in my mind. One of them is, of course, volume that we've been talking about, but another is velocity. It's the speed at which information is coming at us. And it's also variety, whether it's structured or unstructured data, in the form of text, audio, video, and numbers. There is so much information coming at us so quickly of so many different types. And the question is really, so what are companies doing with all of this information? The unfortunate part is that most companies are spending a lot of money and resources collecting all this stuff, but they're not using it, or they're not using it effectively. According to an IDC study, most companies don't use the data they collect. In fact, only 17% use most of what they have. Gartner also says that companies lose about $8.2 million a year from poor data quality. If you think back to the slide where I was quantifying the value of 1.8 zettabytes of data as equal to the gross domestic product of several key nations, unused data really costs company big dollars. And it's not only in sort of the hard cost today, but it's in the loss of future revenues. Because if you don't know what you don't know, you can't make good decisions on what you don't know either. I've got a link here, too, on an article that you can take a look at that I think is an interesting article on this front. So what are companies that are using their data using it for? They're seeing improvements in things like customer service, competitive intelligence, and I'm going to go back to that point, cost management, and also new product development. The Economist Intelligence Report that's linked to here says 77% of companies say data is extremely valuable in achieving competitive advantage. The net is companies that aren't trying to create competitive advantage are not really just standing still. They're actually sliding backwards as others take advantage of the changes that are going on in the marketplace. So let's think about it in terms of a concrete example. I read an article the other day that was called Healthcare Benefits of Big Data, and it talked about big data holding the key to understanding healthcare today and really improving it in the future. In fact, one doctor in there was saying that putting the knowledge in the hands of doctors would sort of save lives, enable patients to make informed decisions about their health, some really compelling stuff. One of the interesting data facts in this was that males 20 years old and under are 80% more likely to have a concussion than their same-age female peers, although the risk of concussion peaked for both genders at age 16. I don't even want to think about what that means in terms of what guys are doing at 20 that females aren't, and what they're both doing at age 16, or why they're both more susceptible to concussion at that particular age. But, of course, it might speak to the fact that a lot of guys continue to play physical contact sports well past their teens, while females may be less likely to, and because of this, males may be more likely to suffer head trauma. Well, I'm not in healthcare. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what it's going to mean in terms of applying this knowledge, but I do know that even a few years ago, we really wouldn't have had the resources to gather that kind of information and then process it like we can today. And there's so much more healthcare providers can do with that sort of level of detail at their fingerprint. They can be using healthcare data at their fingertips, right? So they can be using healthcare data to learn about patient populations. They can be taking actions to enhance preventative care, drive business decisions by accessing key information like demographics or chronic conditions about populations. It opens up information for advances, opportunities for advances in healthcare and preventative medicine that really would have been impossible only a few years ago. So healthcare is a huge industry, and it's a great example of how big data is being used to improve decision-making. But what about companies in other industries that are looking to really make the most of big data and the potential opportunities it can provide? Where should you start? So we talked a little bit about volume, velocity, and variety, which I really think of as the foundation of a kind of big data platform. But there are a couple other key themes I think companies should consider if they want to harness this power of big data accuracy, timeliness, and level of detail. I'm not going to go in deep on all of these areas, but I do want to make a couple of comments. Before we developed data platforms that could handle large data sets, we relied on data samples, of course, to get the information we needed. That data was meant to be representative, but that isn't quite the same as being comprehensive. And that's what we're talking about, too, in terms of that data information and the accuracy that we're able to achieve through platforms that can handle unprecedented amounts of data is really amazing and powerful. Timeliness speaks to the speed at which we can access data, and I think we all know and live with the fact that we live in a real 24/7 global world. We really need real-time data now to make decisions that are going to drive competitive advantage, because certainly other companies are out there with that today. I know I've come across situations where I can't get the data I need when I need it, and I'm sure you have as well. And today, that's really just not good enough. The level of detail talks about how much information we need in order to make a decision, and that's an important factor too. We need enough detail to have confidence that we're making the right decision, but also not so much that we're caught in paralysis. I heard a really interesting story on NPR when I was listening to the radio the other day, one of my long commutes, and it was a test that was done around in supermarkets around jam. So they had these two different tests with jam sampling stations, and one station had about 6 jars of jam out to sample that you could buy, and the other test station another day had 20 or so jams out there for folks to sample. So here's what the irony was. Foot traffic was way up at the station that had 20 jars of jam to sample. A lot more people stopped there and sampled stuff. But the sales of jam were actually higher at the table with only 6 jars of jam, even though there were fewer tasters who stopped. I think this really reinforces for me that more is not always better in terms of decision making, and too much volume can really result in indecision. So it's curating. It's not just enough to have the right information, but you've got to curate it, and it's got to be put in the hands of the people who can act on it, make sense of it. And that today is really about just about everybody in the entire organization. About a year ago, SAP had sponsored a survey by the Economist Intelligence Unit that indicated that 8 out of 10 respondents said they did not share data between departments and employees. And it just makes me wonder, what are they waiting for? We all know that information is a really critical business aspect, and that the more information that's available, the better the responses and the decisions will be from everyone in the company. So hoarding information at the top of the food chain is not going to optimize decision-making throughout the whole organization. So what's the best combination of actions? You see it reflected here. It's focusing on the right information. Share the right information with the right people to drive the right behaviors. So if you're trying to drive cross-selling at a call center, share information on the top 3 products that seem to be selling to a particular, audience. Don't share information about how long the calls are going. I think it's democratizing data, which is really about making information easily accessible and usable. Having the right data tools and investing in the latest technology. So if most of your salespeople are on the road, make sure they have, iPads or a tablet of some sort, a smartphone, reports that can be easily digested and read on those platforms. So this is about data accessibility and the level of transparency, really, for all employees within your organization. Finally, to me, it's about cultivating data champions. So people will use information once they find out it's easily accessible and digestible. But until they figure out how easy it is, they'll limp along with what they have. And I was thinking about this in relation to a close friend of mine who's a real technological Luddite. She had no use whatsoever for YouTube until I showed her you could actually search for cute sort of animal videos, and she is a real animal nut. Suddenly she was off running, right, with an incredibly short time frame. She was a YouTube junkie, actually working on her own channel around animal videos. So I think this aspect of cultivating a champion, having them continuously demonstrate the value of the data and how to do it, is the way in which even, diehard skeptics can be sold in terms of using this kind of information. So harnessing big data effectively, making it available throughout the organization, companies can really free up enormous amounts of the time their employees used to spend trying to get information they wanted to make a decision, and instead spend that time, for example, trying to sell more effectively. And I think that new information coupled with an unharnessed ability to do, scenario modeling and the crunching of massive amounts of data quickly allows companies to really even start to rethink the kinds of businesses they could be in, and really reimagine what they're able to do for their customers, which is, for me is really SAP's sweet spot. And it's part of when I talk about what I really love about my day-to-day job today. Excuse me. So SAP knows big data. Besides being the worldwide leader in business analytics, we know this market. Our mission is really about helping customers and partners transform their businesses and running better, which is what big data done right can really do for companies. And I think we're in a really unique position to address those 3 V's that I was talking about. So talking about volume again. So one of the 3 V's was volume, and Sybase's IQ platform really gives customers the ability to store massive data sets, documents, and web content while providing application services to really analyze that data. And Sybase Mobility makes that data accessible anytime, anywhere, leveraging our Afaria platform and SQL Anywhere. So for me, a great example to put a fine point on this is we've got a key partner that has over 25,000 customers in more than 70 countries throughout the world. They've got a suite of compliance solutions that are really designed to kind of help retail and institutional investment firms manage compensation, client acquisition, and employee trading, which is fueled by massive amounts of both internal and external data. The system had been based on a traditional relational database, and as the data volumes grew, it really started to break down. This is problematic, of course, not just for end users, but also from a compliance and reporting standpoint for the company. They implemented Sybase IQ, and it was basically effectively able to manage the enormous amount of data through it is a column-based analytics server, and that system is now performing really, really well and primed for sort of growth, which, again, allows them to compete competitively in the market in which they do best. We also have a really interesting offering around the Velocity story, and it is the newest addition to the SAP family, which is SAP HANA, which is an in-memory computing device. It allows customers to process zettabytes, really, of information at lightning speed. And I have a really interesting example on this front, too, with a player in the pharma industry that's a partner of ours. As you can imagine, compiling the results of massive clinical trials and expressing the trending and the results needed to satisfy, an entity like the FDA is a real challenge. And there's no doubt when you're talking about the pharma marketplace, a first-mover advantage in getting a drug to market results in sort of exponential revenue results and returns. So with HANA, we had examples of some of the clinical trial analysis data crunching that they were doing, where it went from a process that took 3 days because of the volume of data down to seconds. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the potential financial impacts of this kind of acceleration in an industry that's as competitive as the pharmaceutical industry. That's really just one type of example that's material around what Velocity can do for an existing business today. Finally, on the variety front, I think of information management systems. Ours really brings disparate data sources together for analysis and distribution. And without this powerful technology, really rationalizing, correlating, data flow would be really meaningless. We've got a media partner who was able to cut the amount of time it was taking them to process and analyze disparate social media information, which you can imagine for a minute, too, back over the volume story. It was taking several days and a few hundred people to look at it in terms of correlating that data down to a matter of minutes. And those resources could then be moved to other areas of the business that would benefit from, closer attention and more oversight. So I think this is a case of taking care of urgent business and then being able to kind of redeploy those resources to areas that are strategic, that could help someone differentiate their business. So these are just a few examples of how SAP is innovating for customers. But, even though we're quickly becoming known for our innovation, I don't think it's as well known a fact the amount of SAP technologies that are actually being leveraged by other companies and embedded in solutions that are outside of what you might think of SAP's sort of core. In fact, really driving innovation in marketplaces that aren't our core focus area is one of the huge benefits of making our technology available to customers and partners who want to stick with their strengths and really leverage our best-in-class solutions to help them build out their offerings, whether they're a software product or a service product. You can bet SAP data and analytics solutions are embedded on top of companies in key industries like healthcare, finance, high-tech, media. You see some of them reflected here, energy. So we've got more than 800 of them worldwide. And even as big as SAP is, we'll really never be able to exploit the breadth of our technology capability on our own. So for me, this is when I talked about what's exciting to me on a day-to-day basis is this aspect of saying, hey, when I go to work every day, I get to see really creative ways our technology is being used in sort of infinite varieties that hadn't even crossed our minds by other companies who have other skill set, areas of focus, markets that they're after. And we've really created this sort of symbiotic relationship between innovation and our technology in the OEM marketplace. So this is funny. It really makes me think of this video we put together a few months ago, which had the theme of music. And it was showing about how SAP works with partners to bring a lot of technologies together that on their own are interesting, but combined really form a sort of orchestra that makes it possible to create better, more expansive and beautiful music, or in our case, software solutions. So I'd love for you guys to take a look at the video and let me know what you think, because we spent a lot of time trying to think about, hey, what is really the right analogy or story about how we want to work with others and what's the result of that. And this, for me, really says it all, because it's about technology and solution working together to perform better, i.e. create a better outcome, a more filled out, whether it's song or solution story, than they would in and of themselves. So we reach into a ton of different industries to provide customers with the power of this sort of big data. And I think we're going to continue to see advances in almost every industry as a result of customers being able to make more effective business decisions, right, touch their end customers in a new way based on sort of accurate, real-time data that's got the right level of detail. So for me, this really brings us back kind of full circle to that quote that I opened with around Thomas Jefferson. Data insights will drive wise actions, which in turn can drive real value for company as they really, quote, spend this information, resulting in, competitive differentiation in today's marketplace. So I'm really excited about the opportunities we give our partners, other companies to do what they do best by really taking what we do best and developing kind of innovative big data and analytics solutions. I think this is one of the things as I think about the marketplace that really makes this an exciting time for all of us, are the way in which new business processes will be reimagined in light of what's possible today that wasn't possible before. So, Rich, I really want to, I thank you for the time and the opportunity to do this. I'd like to give you a few links here of some of which I referenced in the presentation where folks can go out and take a little look. Feel free to reach out and contact me as well, and hit our website and delve a little deeper into SAP's thoughts in this area. So thanks, and back over to you, Rich.
Well, thanks for that, Carolee. I was while you were talking, I was really curious about the Thomas Jefferson quote, and I couldn't find the one piece of information there that I wanted, which was the context, right? Was he giving a speech about education? Was he trying to fund a library? Right? So It just seemed to bring home for me that information without context, as you know, you bring all these pieces together, is still missing something. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Rich. And I think that's a really interesting comment. And for me, it really goes back to when we're talking about those three V's between volume, velocity, and variety. You know, I think in a lot of ways you really touched on the central part of that issue is the part of what's challenging about those three trajectories is exactly that. It's the context, or for me, another way of saying that is when I was talking about the correlation of all of that, right? So the relationship between that information, one piece to another, that's really where the power comes from. And that's the aspect of part of why so much volume is being created and the types of data that's being created. And I think that also speaks to that bigger picture of sort of reimagining business processes in that context, is sort of saying, hey, you've got to look at the whole holistic picture of what a company's trying to achieve, and then sort of the art of what's possible and not impossible now, given this. So, I mean, I think you really touched on a core issue there.
And so I'm curious, you know, SAP has been in the information business, right, for a long time, but suddenly everyone's talking about big data. What do you think has changed?
Yeah, so I think, well, you're right, and certainly I think, you know, and certainly my career thus far, the emphasis on sort of, hey, the amount of information and how you analyze information and thinking about it is not a new subject. I think big data is really part of, right, the continual, you know, this is a really amazing time to live in terms of the unleashing of ongoing innovation. And in the same way we can think about Richard Werman's sort of comments, you know, 20 years ago about the amount of information, that how quickly that was growing. We're also seeing, right, in terms of whether it's at the chip level and the capabilities that are possible, sort of this increase. What I think has changed is sort of this increased ability to correlate, digest, and compile massive amounts of data and really disparate types of data, and how long it takes us to do that. And I frankly don't think that's going to stop. I think that evolution is going to be an ongoing basis. And, you know, probably you and I, you know, provided we're both still around 20 years ago, 20 years from now, in the future, may have another conversation, right, of sort of what big data looks like to us today that we can't even imagine of what it will look like or mean 20 years in the future. And the companies that are really get that and try and tackle that today, I think, are the ones that we'll see and still be talking about 20 years from now.
So, Carolee, when we think about that wider ecosystem out there, right, people tend to equate big data with MapReduce and Hadoop. And I saw that you had that in your diagram, right? You have hooks into that way of getting at unstructured data. But to SAP, is big data much bigger than that? Is Hadoop just a subset of what we're talking about here?
Sure, absolutely. I think when you start thinking about, and again, I think that really shows the relationship to what we were just talking about a moment ago, Rich, is that aspect of there are ways in which information might be compiled, accessed, and that are important today, but that will continue to evolve. And for me, it's back to that. I mean, in the end, it's that big picture part of the story that says, hey, what business processes are unleashed by technology? And there will be a lot of ways, and frankly, there are no doubt folks listening right now that are much brighter than I that have other ideas about ways in which information may be collected, accessed, shared, correlated. And the degree to which we start on that today and continue to make sure it has a relationship to how to drive competitive advantage, which is, you know, back to some of those reports that I was showing too in the deck about how infrequently companies are really leveraging or harnessing the data that they've got and how they do that. And so there will be lots of different technologies, companies that will innovate in certain ways. The folks that are really thinking about this are continuing to look at that in relationship to what's possible for their business, and those are the ones that are really going to distinguish themselves in my mind.
Well, Carolee, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today.
It's been my pleasure, Rich, and I hope we'll talk again soon.
You bet, you bet. And I see on this last slide here, you've got some great ways to engage with SAP, so appreciate that.
Yeah, invite everyone to go ahead, and feel free also to reach out to me if you have any direct feedback. I'd love to hear from others about their thoughts about or innovations that are going on as they think about big data.
Terrific. Okay, well, thanks again, and that's it for the Rich Report, folks. Stay tuned for more news and information on the world of big data.